Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Racha Kudash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is called The Trench. Pretty much I just chose that thought popped in my mind. The trench. I think it's fitting for this lesson. This lesson came through the inspiration of a video I was watching earlier. The brother Tazamah from the GMS Dallas camp, and he was going into, legislation that brothers have gone over, a few times already, dealing with, they can, if they deem you to be a threat to the public, health-wise, they can detain you. And one thing you're going to find out that all of this legislation, these different numbers and letters and all of that crap that you see, is nothing more than the same thing done over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. It's the same language. It's the same bullshit. But the thing is, it's different terminologies depending on the times and depending on what they're using it for at the time. Today it just happens to be sickness. In other times it was different things, So what I want to do is I want to just read the definition of the word trench and to bring out something that popped in my head, based off of a movie that I remember years ago that I watched. But the word trench says a long, narrow ditch. And that is very fitting. A long, narrow ditch. Anything that's narrow is hard to navigate through. And it's a long, narrow ditch because pretty much that's, what it is. It's hard to maneuver through a trench, than it would be on solid ground. This analogy was used by Yahushai, to warn Israel back then, before 70 AD happened, that the enemy was going to cast a trench about them, the militaries, because of the time that was coming. At that time, it was 70 AD, that insurrection that happened against the people of the Lord back then. And today, we see the same thing happening, but on a bigger scale, because we're coming to the very end, coming to the very wire, and it's going to be, a time like never was before. The book of Daniel 12:1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time, that people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. So this time of trouble that's coming, there's not going to be a time like it. This is why Yahushai, Michael, the angels have to come to deliver the elect, because if not, there will be no flesh left to be saved. Now, when I was watching the brother's video, one thing that did pop in my head that I, couldn't wait to get home so I could look it up, was something called the 1950s Subversion Act. And it has another name, McCarran Internal Security Act, which was a Democrat, that who the pretty much the act was named after, and they actually passed it into law. Truman vetoed it, but the same day that Truman vetoed it, the Senate passed it, which shows you that the president has no power. He's just a puppet, and whatever, legislation the international banking families want to pass through, that's what's going to pass through. That's why Maya Angelou said, give me control of a nation's money and I care not who makes the laws. Because here it is, you would figure that the president's supposed to be, the chief. He's supposed to be in charge. So he's supposed to be able to squash whatever, he deems not so-called constitutional. But he did veto it. But what happened? They overrode it to show you how much power he really has. So this act is the Internal Security Act of 1950. Gives you the stats here, where you can find it. Also the public law. It says also known as the Subversive Activities Control Act of 1950, the McCarran Act. Well, before I read that, the first time I heard about this was a movie called The Spook Who Sat Behind the Door, who was a Jake that joined the CIA, and he learned all the inner workings of the CIA. He learned how to make weaponry, so on and so forth. But he really didn't like Esau. He wanted to take the government down. So what he did was he took that knowledge, went to the ghetto, and, gathered a whole bunch of Jakes and taught them the same things that he learned. And then they started doing raids, on the government, so on and so forth. And down the line, you had these two individuals discussing the whole matter and things that were happening and what can they do to stop it. And one of them mentioned, the 1950 Subversion Act, and then he said the concentration camps, detention centers are already ready. So everything is already in place. They're just looking for the right crisis to enact it. So it says the McCarran Act, after its principal sponsor, Senator Pat McCarran, Democrat of Nevada, or the concentration camp law. See, it's also known as a concentration camp law. And like I said, all of this legislation is all the same stuff. It just has different wording depending on what they're going to use it for. During this time you had communism. During the 2000s, you had the terrorists. Today you have the sickness. So it all depends on. These devils are not particularly bright. They just find the formula that works and they just keep using it. They keep revamping it, but they just change the wording around, and that's what they're good at. So it says, or the concentration camp law is a United States federal law. So this is actually still in the books. It's still in the books. It says, which shows you that these devils, they if they wanted to, they could just do whatever they want. But being as demonic as they are, they got to keep making more and more and more and more and more and more and more laws, to keep the people pretty much, oppressed. It says, is a United States federal law. Congress enacted it over President Harry Truman's veto. It required communist organizations to register with the federal government, which today they're saying if they suspect you of having a sickness, that they can pretty much detain you. And this is what they're trying to do. This is why they're trying to get everybody jabbed up, because that is a part of a medical registration, and this is what they're doing. It says the emergency detention provision was repealed when the NonDetention Act of 1971 was signed into law by President Richard Nixon. It says provisions. Its title were 1. Subversive Activities Control, Subversive Activities Control Act, and number 2, Emergency Detention Act of 1950. The act required communist organizations to register with the United States Attorney General and established the Subversive Activities Control Board to investigate persons suspected of engaging in subversive activities or otherwise promoting the establishment of a totalitarian dictatorship. Either fascist or communist members of these groups could not become citizens and in some case were prevented from entering or leaving the country. Immigrants found in violation of the act within 5 years of being naturalized could have their citizenship revoked. And pretty much that was a buzzword back then, communism. And that's what they pushed it for. Now they can use parts or provisions of this because it said here that, which I got to read into this, the emergency detention provision was repealed when the NonDetention Act of 1971 was signed into law by President Richard Nixon. But just like it was when this was vetoed by President Truman, this could also be vetoed down the line if they want it, or should I say this could also be turned over if they want. Remember, this is an agenda of the so-called elite. So before we read on anymore, let's go to the book of Isaiah chapter 10. Isaiah chapter 10 and 1. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed. So what are the unrighteous decrees? Unrighteous decrees are these laws and this legislation that they're pushing, into or through Congress, first being bills and all of that, to be able to, rob people of their freedoms. And that's pretty much what it is. And every empire that ever ruled, that was pretty much the norm, was that dictatorship, tyrannical type government, to where you either had to comply to the demands of the king / the ones in charge, or, be, at the penalty, of either being incarcerated or put to death. And this is what's going on. This is what's been going on. And the thing is, this is what's going on worldwide today. It says, and their right grievousness which they have prescribed, because these things that they're putting into legislation are grievous to bear, for the average individual. This is not an easy thing to bear. It's not like, you have certain laws that people follow, that they, as long as they follow them, they can enjoy their freedoms and so on and so forth. No, you're setting it up to where it's just a straight up failure all the way around, no matter which way you slice it. So it says, to turn aside the needy from judgment and to take away the right from the poor of my people. And this is pretty much who is targeted by this legislation and others like it, because at the end of the day, the main threat to the New World Order are the Israelites, especially the ones that have awoken to the fact that they're Israelites and that, are, of the mind of not complying with this man's unrighteous decrees, and they see it as a threat, so they're looking for ways to combat that. It says that widows may be their prey and that they may rob the fatherless. Because at the end of the day, it's all about money. It says, and what will you do in the day of visitation, and in the desolation which shall come from far? To whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your glory? Yeah, because you Edomites, you're going to have to pay for all of this, you know? So let's go back to this. It says, United States Attorney General J. Howard McGrath asked that the Communist Party provide a list of all its members in the United States, as well as reveals its financial details. Furthermore, members of communist action organizations, including those. So this is the cover story, you know, the communists. But really, the bottom line is that they push that through law, and this can fall upon anybody, because now they can. At that time, they could have deemed anyone a communist. Just like it's, you know, if you were suspected of, you know, being around or near someone that was considered a terrorist, you were a potential suspect. So now you fall under that umbrella. Umbrellas, inside joke, but it's the truth. And this is how these devils paint those broad strokes, you know, with their legislation. You know, you was 5 blocks away from a place where they raided, and they actually took down a whole cell of people that were considered to be terrorists. But since you was 5 blocks away, then you fall within the scope and the zone, you know, of that. So we have to bring you in for questioning. See what I'm saying? So, and the language is always very vague. Let's see what else we could find here. And like I said, I gotta look into this NonDetention Act of 1971. So they're saying that they repealed Title II of the Emergency Detention Act. But notice that it's just the same language appears in different legislation that you see today, and they use the same word, detention. You know, so it's pretty much just it's a play on words. You know, so they could have repealed it on this, but then they brought it back under something else, because they really don't need this act in this fashion, because this act was set up for the communists, and that terminology communist, you know, doesn't exist in the United States among Jake anymore. You know, so they can repeal it and get rid of it, but come back with something else. Use by U.S. military. The U.S. military continues to use 50 U.S.C. Section 797. It says, citing it in U.S. Army Regulation AR 19-11 in support of allowing installation commanders to regulate privately owned weapons on Army installations. An Army message known as the Act states senior commanders have specific authority to regulate privately owned weapons, explosive and ammunition on Army installations. The Act refers to AR 190-11 and Public Law Section such and such and such, also known as the National Defense Authorization Act. See? So you see how they just keep pushing stuff up and pushing stuff up, and just adding this portion of this law or this regulation with this law, and In turn, cites the McCarran Internal Security Act. The Aller Act reference is a truncated version of the public law. All right, so let's go to 2 Timothy chapter 3 and 1. It says, "This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come." Now, we've looked this word up before, but let's look it up again. Kalepos. Hard to do, to take, to approach. So these hard times are what? Just like the narrowing of that trench. It's hard to navigate, a long, narrow ditch. It says a trench is a type of excavation or depression in the ground that is generally deeper than it is wide and narrow compared with its length. In geology, trenches result from erosion by rivers or by the geological movement of tectonic plates. In this case, it's something that Esau is setting up through this legislation, because a trench restricts movement, just like the legislation that they're pushing restricts movement. And like I said, this scripture here in St. Luke chapter 19 is actually a scripture that already took place. It already took place back in 70 AD. But from time to time, we use it just as an example of the things that are written aforetime were written for our learning, just to show you a glimpse into what's coming, And that's one of the most major things we could use as examples is 70 AD. Also, Nebuchadnezzar, and how he besieged Jerusalem and how hard shit was for our people back then. These are all examples of things that are coming. So we're finished with this. Matter of fact, let me see what else there. Hard to bear, troublesome. So these are troublous times. Dangerous, harsh, fierce, savage. Because the ones that are going to be pushing that harsh condition, which are going to be these military groups, and they're going to bring hardships to Jake. And Jake is not used to these hardships that are coming, because you got to remember that during the time of slavery, Jake got used to, being a slave, being out in the fields, picking cotton. They became hardened to it, so they were able to just deal with it. But nowadays, Jake has been, pampered. They've been, they're soft in comparison to what they used to be. So when this whole shit goes down, you're going to see a lot of, falling apart, because they're not as hard as they used to be back in the days. This is why, when the whole shit goes down, the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushua has to give us the spirit and the drive and the internal fortitude to be able to endure, because, like I said, Jake today is complacent. They live a pampered life. They don't know the difference between, they don't know discipline for the most part. They don't know, the meaning of patience. Everything is quick and now, instant gratification. So it's going to be rough out here. Luke 19:41. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, if thou hadst known, even thou, because you have to remember, he stopped, he was walking, he was coming, he was walking towards the city, he was looking at it, and he actually, at this moment, seen the whole, it's like he was seeing the whole scene in the future, about 30 some odd years in the future, of everything that was happening. The houses being burned, the women being trodden down, the children being trodden down, the men being destroyed, killed, or heads chopping off. However, he saw it, and as he got closer and closer, he started weeping, because he knew that those same people that he was looking at were going to catch hell, and they had no clue or no idea of what was going to happen to them. And he, even though he told them, they still didn't get it. And this is why a lot of these leaders are going to be held responsible, because they're not warning Jake of what's coming. They keep putting Jake back to sleep. They show no sense of urgency to Jake. Jake is just like in that funland spirit. Even though they know they're Israelites. Meanwhile, the wolf is creeping in. The gates are closing in, and Jake is still out there playing games. It says, saying, excuse me, if thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. So what are the things that belong to their peace? Meaning, to be able to flee, and pretty much, the things that belong to their peace, meaning that they were gonna, it was imminent that they were gonna, be taken down by the Romans. It says, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. So they weren't able to see what Yahushua just saw and witnessed concerning Jake and the things that were coming down the pike. It says, for the day shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee. See? So the enemy is going to cast a trench about thee. So it's going to make your life miserable. You're going to be in a narrow situation. And the word there is karax, because they actually besieged the city. And that's how the Romans would besiege the city, is by making those pails and then sticking them in the ground, tying everything together, and besieging the city around, so you couldn't get out. No one could get in, no one could get out. And this is a root word of the word karagma. It says, and compass thee round and keep thee in on every side, so you won't be able to escape. And shall lay thee even with the ground. And that's what happened. And this is why Yahushua was weeping, because he saw the deaths. He saw the bloodshed. He saw the blatant, disregard for human life that the Romans had. And thy children within thee. Yep. Because they didn't spare none. Let's go to Deuteronomy 28 real quick. And then there's one more that came to mind. All right, so Deuteronomy 28. and 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. This is dealing with the Roman Empire. And there was other, incidents where this happened during the Babylonian Empire. They besieged Jerusalem also. It says, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. A nation of fierce countenance. And those Romans, they had a fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. No, neither one. They didn't show no favor. Isaiah chapter 47 and 6. I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. Thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. So it was a real slaughter. And they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. Because the Lord was visiting Jake. And there's another part in Luke where it says, these be the days of vengeance. Because this is what the Lord said will come to Jake for not listening. So those military forces, the way they rolled in like a flood, is the same way they're going to roll in today. Same exact way. 2 Ezra 16 and 67. Behold, the Most High himself is the judge. Fear him. Leave off from your sins and forget your iniquities, to meddle no more with them forever. For so shall the Most High lead you forth and deliver you from all trouble. See? For behold, the burning wrath of a great multitude is kindled over you, and they shall take away certain of you and feed you, being idle with things offered unto idols. So being idle meaning what? Meaning stationary. So you're going to be stationary. This is why we read about this, which is just one act, the Subversion Act. But they have plenty of new legislation in place now that pretty much reads the same thing, like the NDAA. It says, and they that consent unto them shall be had in derision and in reproach, because you have Jake out there that believe because they help Esau, that Esau is going to cement their place for them. They never learn. They never learn that when you play with the snake, you get burnt, you get bit, and trodden underfoot. For there shall be in every place and in the next cities a great insurrection upon those that fear the Lord. And that's pretty much the end of it all. Because the biggest threat are the Israelites. It goes back to the blessing that our forefather Jacob supplanted from Esau. And they're trying to get it back. But they can't. It says, they shall be like madmen, sparing none. Yeah, that's going to be those troops coming in. And then they're not going to spare anybody. They're not going to feel sorry. You can see it right now with the cops. They'll choke somebody out, and no matter how much Jacob plead with them, telling them that they can't breathe, they choke them harder and harder. The more they beg, the harder they choke them. It said, but still spoiling and destroying those that fear the Lord. See? But still spoiling and destroying those that fear the Lord. For they shall waste and take away their goods and cast them out of their houses. So you thinking that you're in your American dream house with your white picket fence. Jake, because you have Jakes out there that think they made it, and they look down on other Jakes that, are still living in the ghettos, in the slums, and they look down upon them. But they don't realize that they're going to lose that shit too. And it's going to be way harder for them because at least Jake in the ghettos, they've lived somewhat of a rough life, so they'll have a little bit more, to embrace when this whole shithole goes down than these bougie ass, Jakes, that are living that life, that everything has to be pristine in a certain way, and everything is arranged a certain way, and they're just used to everything, and then they done got so beside themselves that they scream on people at the job if they don't do, they don't have their desk or whatever it is right. Those are the ones that's gonna catch the real hell. And women. Then shall they be known who are my chosen, because the Lord is going to make a separation, a distinction between the elect and the rest of Israel. And they shall be tried as a gold in the fire. Hear, O ye my beloved, saith the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, behold, the days of trouble are at hand, but I will deliver you from the same. Be ye not afraid, neither doubt, for the Most High is your guide, and the guide of them who keep my commandments and precepts, saith the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Let not your sins weigh you down, and let not your iniquities lift up themselves. And this is why, we're constantly reminding brothers out there and few sisters that, the times are getting, shorter, and it's going to get really, really nasty out here. And when it really breaks, you're going to be happy that at least, you were involved, and at least you knew, and at least you hope and pray, and we wait for the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushai to give the increase that we need in order to be protected in these times. So with that, I pray that you brothers and you few sisters have been edified. Until the next time I say Shalom.